What if one of the biggest things that's holding you back isn't your circumstances, but your certainty? I want you to think about that for just a moment. What if the reason that you are not seeing new opportunities, you are not seeing new solutions, or even seeing your own progress isn't because they aren't there? What if it's because you've already decided what is true? And I think one of the most powerful influences on our decisions isn't what we don't know. It's actually what we already believe. And that is what I think I would like to talk to you about today. It's called confirmation bias. Because sometimes the greatest barrier to growth isn't a lack of information. There's a lot out there. It's not lack of information. It is the filter that we're viewing that information through. So that bias, that confirmation bias, we don't even realize in most cases that we even have it. Because most of us like to think that we are objective. We gather facts. We evaluate situations. We make decisions based on logic, and we base those decisions based on our experiences. At least that's what we tell ourselves. But what I've actually come to realize is we often aren't evaluating information nearly objectively as though we think that we are. Instead, we're actually interpreting that information through beliefs we have already formed. And then we call that interpretation, we call that interpretation evidence. This is what is known as that confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our tendency to notice, remember, and actually give more weight to information that supports what we already believe, while unconsciously we are dismissing information that actually challenges it. And really, what's fascinating is that confirmation bias rarely feels like bias. It feels like clarity. It feels like logic. It feels like being right. And that's what makes it so darn powerful, because it operates quietly in the background of our thinking without us even realizing it. So, how does confirmation bias show up in our lives every single day? Well, think about two people experiencing the exact same situation. One may see that situation as opportunity. The other person may see that situation as a risk. One sees progress, while the other, well, they see proof that things are just not working. And the facts, well, they may be identical, but the conclusions are completely different. And why is that? It's because our beliefs influence what we're willing to see. I think this happens far more often than we actually realize. We interpret feedback through an existing assumptions that we have over our lifetime. We evaluate outcomes through those existing expectations. We assess our progress through stories that we've already decided that are true. And then over time, those stories, well, they become the lens through which we view reality, and not reality necessarily itself. So, how does confirmation bias actually keep us stuck as entrepreneurs, as women entrepreneurs? How does it keep us stuck? Well, I see this often with women entrepreneurs and also with business owners. So, a woman may genuinely believe she has tried everything to grow her business. She has worked hard, she has worked long hours, she has invested that time, she's put herself out there, she has made herself visible, and yet she has concluded marketing, well, it doesn't work for me. And sales, well, it isn't my strength. And my audience, well, they will not pay those types of prices. And my industry is way too competitive. But when we look a little bit closer, something interesting often appears. She hasn't necessarily tested every option equally. Instead, she has often invested most heavily in the approach that felt comfortable, in the approach that felt most aligned with the beliefs she had already held. And meanwhile, the strategies that felt uncertain, those strategies that felt uncomfortable or even felt unfamiliar, received far less attention, that felt less consistency, or were just abandoned way too early. When those limited efforts don't create results, well, the original belief, well, it just gets reinforced. Like, see, I knew it wouldn't work, but did it truly not work? Or did the belief actually shape the experience right from the beginning? And that's really the difficult question, because confirmation bias doesn't feel like avoidance. It actually feels like being careful. It feels like being strategic. And it also feels like protecting ourselves from disappointment. Yet it can actually quietly become the very thing that is actually limiting our growth in our business. Because we all tell a story to ourselves, because I've seen this in my own life as well. There have been times when I have been focused more on what wasn't happening than in what was actually beginning to shift in my business and also in some cases in my life. I dismissed the progress because it didn't arrive in the form that I actually expected. I interpreted results through a very narrow lens. And now looking back, I can actually see that I wasn't simply evaluating reality, I was actually filtering it. I was looking at events through assumptions that I didn't even realize that I was carrying. And what began to change things for me was learning to actually pause before accepting my conclusions as actual facts. So instead of asking, what does this result prove? I started asking a different question. I started asking what else could also be true in this situation. That simple question created a little bit of space. When I talk about space, I'm talking about the space between what happened and the story I was telling myself about what it meant. And that space started to change a lot of things for me. Now, with confirmation bias, there are questions that we can go through that help break down this pattern for us. When we become aware of confirmation bias, we don't have to eliminate it, but we can begin to challenge it. Here are a few questions that I now ask myself when I feel confirmation bias is consuming me. What assumption am I making? What evidence might I be also overlooking? If someone else looked at this situation, what might they see differently? Am I evaluating reality or am I protecting a belief? What if the opposite were true? Well, those questions aren't always comfortable to ask yourself, but they are incredibly powerful because growth in your business often begins where certainty ends for you. So, one of the most transformational things that we can do is to become aware of the stories that we've been repeating for so long that they now feel like facts for us. Stories about our capabilities, stories about our worth, stories about our potential. The growth isn't to doubt yourself. The goal here is to become curious enough to examine what you've been assuming through those stories that you've been telling yourself. Because confirmation bias doesn't disappear. But once you can see it, you're no longer completely operating inside of it. You will begin to step outside of it. And that is actually where change becomes possible. Sometimes the most powerful shift isn't learning actually something new. It's finally seeing what has been in front of you all along, but without the filter.